Right, welcome back to round 4 of rendering floor plans in Photoshop. And as I get started today, we're opening up a different type of file. So today I'm actually opening up PDFs, and I have one called Base Plan with Example Furniture. I'm going to click on Open, and when I do, a new dialog box opens up that we haven't used before in this class. And I wanted to go over some of these options because when you first open up a PDF in Photoshop, it can be quite large. Let me change this resolution to 300 because by default it will be at 300. I happened to work on this last class, so it reset it to 150. But what I'd like to do first is point out that the image size is 324 megs, which is huge. And there's two things that we can do to reduce the size. The first thing is to reduce the pixels. So just by taking it down from 300 to 150 pixels, I'm down to 81 megs. The other thing that I'm going to do is this particular floor plan, I actually don't need to print to scale. That's important to note. And I can shrink it down. So I'm going to make the width of this 24. And by making sure that constrain proportions is checked, whatever I change these numbers to, the other number changes to stay in proportion with the other one. So again, 24, this automatically changes to 17. And this will only work if constrain proportions is on. And then once I click on OK, it'll go ahead and open up that floor plan for me. Now for this particular exercise, it's really important to make sure that you are really careful with your layer naming and your layer organization. So as I was saying, layer organization is really important when you're working with PDFs, really any file, but today in particular because there's going to be a lot of screens that look blank and hard to see, including this one because it is mostly a transparent layer. So right off the bat, I'm going to double click on layer 1 and I'm going to rename it floor plan because that's what it is. And to help me see my floor plan a little bit better, I'm going to add a new layer and I'm going to rename this background. Now my background layer right now is blank. But what I want to do is hit G for gradient. So you can see my paint bucket tool comes up. And down here I have gray and white color. And if I hit X, it brings the white color up front. So I'm going to go ahead and click into my background. So I have the right color, but what I need to do is reorder my layers and pull the background to the back. So again, that helps me see the floor plan layer a little bit better. And as I zoom in on this, you can see that there's a bed in this room. It's a really simple floor plan from one of my Revit exercises in one of my other classes. So I've got floor plan and background. Now to start off, what we're going to do is I'm going to teach you guys how to add shading to your walls. And we don't want to do that on the floor plan layer. We want to make another layer and call this one wall shading. And this is where we are going to add the color to our walls. We don't want to do it right on the floor plan layer because we want to make sure that we can still turn this on and off without affecting the floor plan. We want to also make sure that we can change the color, change the transparency, basically still have all control over the shading without affecting the floor plan. Now, an easy way of doing this, the best way of doing this, is to actually use your magic wand tool. Now, in the past, the magic wand tool hasn't served us very well, but in this particular case, it does a really good, clean job of selecting our walls. Now, in order for this to work correctly, again, first make sure you're in your magic wand tool. So if you're stuck in quick selection, right-click and go to magic wand. The next thing would be to turn on Sample All Layers up here in the top center. What Sample All Layers does is it allows me to stay on this blank wall shading layer, but it will still sample everything in my floor plan layer. So for example, if I turn off sample all layers and I just want to select this part of the wall, it won't work. What it's doing right now, if you can see my little ants marching, it's selecting everything. But as soon as I turn on sample all layers, floor plan becomes fair game and I can click into the floor plan. Now you might notice if you keep clicking, it just goes to a new selection without adding to your selection. So this is when you have to go back to kind of our masking methods. And if you hit the shift key, I'm going to pull over to the left a little bit. When I hold the shift key down, a plus sign comes up. So I can add some or all of these walls. And then after I have my walls selected, I'm going to reset my colors by clicking right here. So resetting my colors, going to my gradient bucket. What's that? Oh, I'm going to do it in two separate selections. Thanks though. And I've added my color there. Then once you have your color filled in, you hit Control D to deselect, and you can go ahead and keep adding to it. But what you need to do is go back to your wand, select your walls, now hold the shift key down, and you can continue adding the same way. Now I'm going to switch back to gradient and fill in my color too. Control D to deselect one more time. And now what I'd like to do is I'm going to toggle my layers. So at this point, you should all make sure that your wall shading is truly separate from your floor plan and that your floor plan is separate from your background. So these should all be independent layers right now. And again, the reason why that helps us is that in the wall shading layer, this is what I call the lazy woman's way of lightening up the wall shading. You can just come to your opacity menu here to the right and change it to a lighter gray. This isn't the best way of doing it, but it's just a really quick way to see if you like the aesthetic of it. To do this correctly though, there's three different ways of using the opacity menu. First, if you just put your cursor over the word opacity, you can lighten it up or darken it up. You can also pull down and another sliding scale comes up, similar. Or you can just manually put this in here, whether it's 50% or all the way up to 100%. Either way. What I'm going to do now though is go back to my gradient and I'm going to select a gray color. Remember, this is all on my wall shading. And I'm going to fill this in. This isn't quite the color I want. Let me go a little bit lighter. So weird. Oh, here, my opacity set to 30. Now we want 100. There we go. Now we'll get the full effect. Up here at the top, last time I used my gradient bucket, I turned the opacity down to 30%. But now with it being up all the way, now it's truly a gray wall. So I didn't use the opacity, but I used an actual gray color to turn it down. One of the things that we talked about was how to add shadow to your floor plans. And if you want to add shadows to your walls, you can do it in two ways. You can either double click on your layer, not on the name because that changes the layer name, but double click right outside of the name and a layer style menu pops up. Or you can come down here to effects that you're probably more used to, and from here you can go to drop shadow. And that does not look right at all. I don't know why it's all black. Distance spread. Let me hit cancel on this. I don't know why it's being so dramatic about it. I'm going to try it one more time. If it doesn't work this time, I'm going to leave this for now so I can show you guys how to add material onto your floor plan. And we will come back to drop shadow when we do our other floor plan. So yeah, for now I'm going to cancel. So never mind that for now. We'll come back to drop shadows in just a bit. The next thing that I wanted to show you is how to add flooring material. And I'm going to show it to you in two ways. One would be to use the gradient bucket, and I'll also show you how to add some texture. And then the second way would be how you guys can go online, find images of flooring, and then use transformations to duplicate it, and then masking to kind of set a certain area. Before I begin, I'm going to make a new layer one more time. And then this time, I'm going to call this one carpet, or I can actually, this one I'll call flooring/carpet, since we're going to do more than one flooring style. So in flooring-carpet, we also want to go back to our magic wand tool, make sure that sample all layers is still on, and for this example, I'm going to use this bedroom. So I'm going to click inside the bedroom, and it gets an island of where the carpet would go. And then from here, I can use the same color of gray, or really any color I want. I don't want to get too pink on this. Let me go a little bit darker. And then with the gradient tool, I can just fill it in with the color. So it's as simple as just really putting in a gradient of color, if you'd like. I made this one a little bit darker, so the next step of what I'm going to do is show you how to add some texture to this. And this is a new menu for our class, and it's up here in Filter, Noise, and then Add Noise. So there's a lot that we can do here. When I go to Add Noise, you'll see a preview, if you have preview on, that it's adding some dust and scratches. And by default, this monochromatic button won't be pushed. So you can see that I'm getting kind of some rainbow colors. In this preview, you can zoom in a little bit more and see what it looks like at 100%. But you can see that without monochromatic, you get lots of purples and blues, just different tones. And really for flooring, for it to look right, you should put it on monochromatic. And then you can also change the amount of noise that's going in. Typically for like carpeted textures, less is better. If you go more, it starts to look a little bit crazy, even almost a little marbly. So I like to go kind of down towards the low end. So it's a really subtle texture without getting too crazy. So that's one way of completely manually doing flooring. Again, it was just a gradient bucket, and then we added a filter on it, noise, and then add noise. Now another thing that we can do would be to go online and find a sample of flooring and bring it in and transform it. So during our last class that we had, we went online and we just Googled wood floors. I'm going to go ahead and do that same thing. And when you're pulling in images of flooring, you want to check for a couple things. First, make sure it's a top-down view, like these right here. If it's at an angle, it'll make your floor look skewed. And also make it look like it's sloping into the ground, like almost like your floor is a slide that goes into the abyss of nowhere. So these samples are really good. And hopefully you can see on my screen as I'm skipping through, this is a great sample because it's at least 1,000 pixels. This one's 2,600 pixels, so really the best resolution you can get, the better. The other thing too, these are good sample sizes in that they are 1,000 pixels, but because the actual sample of wood is so small, you would be duplicating this for a really, really long time. Whereas this one, it's a bigger section of wood flooring, so it'd be a little bit easier. I'm going to click on this wood flooring, and I'm going to do something I don't do often. I'm going to see if it works. I'm actually going to copy the image right from the internet. This is something I haven't done in class yet. And I'm going to come up here and just do edit, paste. Woohoo! Okay, that was a little bit easier. So I just copied directly from the internet and I pasted it into my drawing. Typically in the past we have saved it and then opened it. In the past when we've saved it, we've done other modifications to it before bringing it in. But in this particular case, I was just bringing it right into the file that I was working in, so I feel okay copying and pasting it. Now from here, I still need to transform it, because if you take a look at my plank, it's almost the size of my table, so that's a really big plank. So what I want to do is hit Control T for my transformation, and by default, if you just start pulling and dragging, it does it proportionately. And it's because this little chain is on, and I always suggest that you keep that on. But what you can do to bypass it is hold the Shift key down, and then it allows you to essentially shrink your your layer in one direction. Now this is Photoshop, so it doesn't have to be exact, no, but I think this plank looks a little better. The other thing that I'm trying to do is I'm making sure that this material covers the width of my living room. So I'm really just eyeballing it. I just want to make sure that the wood floor will cover from side to side, so I can really fill in that whole space. That will prevent me from having to duplicate it to the side as well as stacking it up and down. So as soon as I have it, I hit enter, and then I'm going to zoom out a little bit and then really pull it in just to the living room area. And then from here, to make a copy of this, I can hold our favorite duplicate key down, which is Alt, and you can see my arrow turns into a double-headed arrow, and I just pull down and it just stacks it right on top. Now one thing I would suggest doing every once in a while, because it starts to show a pattern, like you can see this dark plank starting to stick out, I would suggest going to Control T and either rotating it, or you could even, after you copy it, so I'm going to hit enter, I'm going to copy it down one more time. You could also do Control T, and then with the right click you can flip it horizontal, and you can also flip it vertical. So play around with those a little bit to make it slightly more randomized. I'm going to keep copying down, and I'm also going to continue to transform. And I'm just going to copy it one more time. And that should be good. So now I've got all of these different layer 1 copies, and shame on me for not automatically naming it wood floor, but I can fix that in just a minute. What I want to do first is to combine all of these layers so that they act as one group, as they should, because they're all part of a floor now. So to do that, right now I have the bottom selected. I can hold the Shift key and then click at the top of my list. I'm going to show you that one more time, except this time I'm going to start from the top. I hold the Shift key and grab from the bottom, and then I can right click and go to Merge Layers, and you'll see that it turns it into one layer, and I will rename this wood floor. So now if I try to move it, it all moves together. Now for this next part, I'm going to go back to some of the first things that we did in our class with masking. And now instead of selecting my floor using the magic wand and sample all layers, that won't work anymore, because now I've got a wood floor here. So see how it's grabbing the wood floor and a whole bunch of other stuff? This file has gotten too busy to do that anymore. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm momentarily going to turn off my wood floor so I can see my floor plan underneath. I'm also going to select my floor plan, because what I'm trying to do is find essentially this island of flooring where the wood floor will go. So if I click in here, it isn't perfect, but it's pretty close, and I would take that as most of the area where my wood floor is going. And now after I've selected, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back to my wood floor and turn it on. You can see that the selection is still active, and I'm simply going to hit the mask button. And so now it's automatically masked my floor where the floor plan is. I'm not quite done yet though, because under my door I have my mask on. So if I hit the slash button above the enter key, you can see that I have a mask there that I don't need. And so what I want to do is I need to color this back in. And really the easiest way of doing that is to hit M for marquee. And I draw around that area. And I go back to gradient, and I just want to fill that in. Whether you use gradient or brush, the thing that's nice about doing the marquee tool first is I just switched to brush. Oh, that must be a really big brush. Let me resize it. Yeah, that brush is huge. But you can see, even if I have a huge brush, if I click into that space, because of the way that I created my mask, it doesn't affect the doorway. It just stays within that selection. So let me make my brush even smaller. So now if you go through several strokes, it contains it in that one area. And then again, to deselect, I hit Control D. So I'm almost done. I'm actually going to bring my floor plan right on top so I don't lose any of those details. The other thing that I need to do is the wood floor stops in the hallway. And there's one thing that I want you to avoid. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. I don't want you to draw another marquee and then transform this. Because what ends up happening is it ends up getting too distorted. So you can see here the knots in the floor just end up getting too stretched out. You can barely read it. So what we want to do instead is we're going to use our marquee tool and combine it with the Alt duplicate, and we're going to copy this over. So what I mean by that is I have the floor selected, not the mask, but the actual floor. And I'm just going to eyeball an area that should fit the hallway. And once I have this selected, so I'm going to move from M, the marquee tool, to the V or move tool. You can see on my cursor there's a little pair of scissors, so even right now if I move it, you can see it's cutting it. Now in this case, I don't want to actually cut it and move it. What I want to do is duplicate it. And as I've done several times already, I'm going to hold the Alt key down. You can see the cursor changing already. And I'm just going to drag this over here. And I'm going to go ahead and align it with the threshold right there. This part's already been masked for me. So I'm going to align it with this threshold here and this threshold here. And then Control D. So now if I zoom out again, you can see what that floor starts to look like. So those are the two different techniques. Again, we've got the manual fill using the gradient bucket and then adding the noise with our filter. And then the second option was going online and transforming the material to fit the area. Now, last but not least, I'm going to go through shading again. If it doesn't work, I'm going to do a separate video for that, so you'll at least have this part for it. But what I'm going to do again is I'm going to go to Effects, but this time I want an inner shadow. And here you can see on my furniture, if I turn preview on and off, you can see where those inner shadows are around the furniture. So if I change the size, you can see that it changes the size, or like it diffuses the light differently. So a hard shadow versus a soft shadow. And then distance controls how big of a shadow is on your plan. And you can even change the angle of the light. So this is the line that basically shows where it's coming in from. You can control all of those things. You could even change the color of the light if you wanted to. Typically black is a good way to go, but you can control that as well. So that's how you would add shading to your furniture, and how you'd also add texture to your plans as well.